I want you to sit alone in a room for 10 minutes. If that call to action makes you want to leave this video right now, so be it, as long as you end up sitting alone in a room with nothing, just staring at a blank wall for solely 10 minutes. No phone, no music, no podcast, no task at hand, no cleaning your room, no reading a book. Just you and the room and whatever the room has to offer and whatever arrives when the silence stops being filled. Most people cannot do this. Not won't do this, but simply cannot. The discomfort will arrive within less than 60 seconds, and the hand will then immediately move towards the phone before the conscious mind has registered what is actually starting to happen. It is a reflex. It is trained over the constant years of conditioning, so thorough that the absence of stimulus now registers as its own sort of emergency. So answer this for me. What are you actually running from? Not in the way that question usually gets asked, nor in any big dramatic sense, but instead simply, what is in the silence that makes you want to avoid it so much, that it makes you use so much effort to avoid it? Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He was not speaking in theory, he was not being theoretical, he was making a precise, exact diagnosis of what he observed in the people around him. The constant flowing motion, the entertainment, the hunting and the gambling and the socializing and the war and the endless manufacture of distraction. His argument was that human beings are constantly in flight from something that they will never end up naming. That the busyness itself and the noise and the distraction or the constant search for the next best thing, all of it is an elaborate avoidance strategy directed at a singular, specific, very exact target. And that target is, if you could guess it, themselves. The moment that the stimulation stops, Pascal observed that something else arrives to take its place. It is a feeling, it is a knowledge, or something about the nature of life being lived that the person themselves has been successfully outrunning, and the quiet that they so desperately avoid makes it impossible to avoid itself any longer. And rather than face that thing, rather than sit with it and figure out what that thing actually is and how they can resolve it, the person reaches for the next distraction or the next entertainment source or the next thing that fills out the space before that very specific thing can arrive. And Pascal wrote that, shockingly, in 1670, and he was somehow describing your phone in the modern day, from such a long time ago that it's almost eerie in a sense. Now, another philosopher that captures this perfectly is Schopenhauer, and he came from this at a very different direction 2 centuries later than Pascal. Schopenhauer's pendulum, the swinging pendulum that you see in a lot of cartoons or in physics or anything like that, which was the image that Schopenhauer used to describe human existence in a sense. It swings between desire and boredom. One end is desire, one end is boredom, and life as a whole continues to swing between that pendulum. I've made a whole video on this different topic, but anyway, when you want something and you don't have it, you suffer the pain of lacking or the desire. When you get the item, the wanting will briefly subside and the pendulum will theoretically stop very briefly, but in its place will arrive boredom. So the flat and the affectless emptiness of a person who has everything they wanted or everything they think they want or think they need finds in a sense that the wanting itself was the point, not the having of the item. So for Schopenhauer, boredom was not the absence of stimulation. Instead, it was the presence of the self without any sort of distractions. The moment that you are left alone with what you yourself genuinely are and without the noise or the wanting or the pursuit to give you shape and direction. And most people finding themselves in that moment experience it as something completely unbearable. And it's not because there is something wrong with them in a sense, but instead because they have never developed any sort of relationship with that self. They have been running from that self so constantly or consistently that its presence feels like an intrusion. So the person who cannot sit alone for 10 minutes is not a bored person, but instead they are a person afraid of what boredom will reveal to them. Again, to make this point even deeper, another philosopher, Heidegger, made the argument that cuts, in my opinion, the deepest, so I've theoretically saved the best for last. He distinguished between having shallow boredom, which is, boredom for waiting for a train, or not knowing what to do on that train, or being at a shit party, or having nothing specific to do in the day. And then he had profound boredom. So profound boredom, for Heidegger, was a fundamental mood that is occasionally breaking through the surface of ordinary life and then revealing something that the busyness or the shallow, the stupid things we do from day to day has been concealing this entire time. It reveals the structure of existence itself as a whole. When profound boredom arrives, and it is guaranteed to arrive in today's day and age, for almost everyone as a matter of fact, it arrives in the gaps between the tasks and the entertainment and the distractions, and when it arrives, the time itself starts to slow down. The very specific content of your life begins to recede, and the things that normally give you an identity or a purpose or a feeling of accomplishment or even a direction, things like your work or your relationships or your projects or your sense of who you are, even in a sense, these temporarily lose their grip on you. They lose their grip on your life, and what is left in that loosened state is the very bare fact of existing, of being here, of being a person who will eventually die, of having a finite amount of time and somehow spending most of it avoiding the question of what to do with the time. So Heidegger believed this was not a malfunction, but instead he thought that it was the most important experience available for anyone to go through, that deep, profound boredom. Because the person who has sat in that moment, sat with that profound boredom, who has allowed it to arrive and stayed with it instead of immediately reaching for their phone or some sort of distraction from it, has never been forced to confront something real about their existence that the busy person never actually has to face. So what they do is they have to ask, in the absence of all directions, of everything, what it is they actually want. Not what they've been told what to want, not what the feed or the Instagram, reels tells them what they want, not what the next task requires of them, but instead what they specifically, directly need, what they, without any external prompt, actually want or need from the time that they have, the time that they're left with. Because in life, the only value we truly inherit is time. Everything else is added on. And most people have no idea what it is they want. So, in a sense, the phone is not the problem. The phone is the solution to the problem that you have never been allowed to fully experience. The distractions, in another sense, or in the same sense, are not the problem. They inherit the same value of that phone in the sense that they just cover up the distraction, or they are the distraction to cover up the experiences that you avoid. So that leaves us with the problem, which is the silence, which is the self alone in the silence, the specific and the uncomfortable and the completely necessary encounter with what you actually are when nothing is asking of you to be anything in particular. So every single time you reach for the phone, in the first 30 seconds of quiet, the first even 10 seconds of sitting in quiet, in silence, you are constantly choosing again and again not to find out. So like Pascal saw coming in 1670, or Schopenhauer naming the mechanism in 1818, or Heidegger describing what you lose by avoiding it in 1927, all of those were pointing at the exact same room, and it was the room that you would not sit with alone, the room that you would never enter without your phone. But the room itself has no phone in it. The room itself has no distractions. The room itself is the room in which the question arrives that you have been outrunning your entire life and you have nowhere to go but to answer it. So that question is simply, it's literally such a simple question. All it is what do you actually want from this life of yours? And you will never ever find the solution to that by scrolling. You will only ever find it by sitting long enough to hear the question out and eventually coming to your own formulated answer.